Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 29 of GT Masters, the review series for Gran Turismo's pretty broad selection of GT class racing machines, or in some cases vehicles which aren't actually bona fide GT racing machines, but that fall into similar parameters, some of which kind of border the line between GT style vehicle and sometimes prototype, such as the Mazda Furai, and to some degree, this car. Now this car is the Pagani Zonda R, a very, very popular supercar slash track day race car, kind of, but not quite-ish. And it's a very interesting vehicle. And the reason why I say that is because this is actually closer to being technically a Mercedes CLK GTR than it is a traditional Zonda. It's called the Zonda, but it shares very little in common with any of the road-going Zondas. For a start, there's the engine. Most road-going Zondas have an AMG-built 7.3 or 7 litre, depending on the model, V12 engine. This also has an AMG V12, but it's much smaller, at 6 litres, and it's actually the engine essentially in a different state of tune from the Mercedes CLK GTR. So it is an actual race engine. It's also put into a car which has a longer wheelbase than the normal Zonda, in effect a Zonda longtail. That is very reminiscent of some of the GT1 style vehicles of the 90s, especially the later 90s, such as the Toyota GT1, the Nissan R390, etc., those kind of homologation vehicles. The Zonda R has that kind of feel to it. As far as its overall spec, well, it's a Pagani Zonda variant, so it's never going to be unimpressive, but it can actually put many of the cars in this series to shame as far as sheer spec. That 6-litre V12 can be tuned up to a massive 1,168 horsepower and 787 foot-pounds of torque. That means that it is more powerful than most of the cars in this series. And it's also a lot lighter than many of them, at 1,070 kilos. That's lighter than the Panoz GTR1, that's lighter than pretty much any of the other GT3 or GT2 cars in this game, and lighter than just most of the cars in this series in general. There are a couple which are lighter, such as the Furai, but not many. Not many at all, in fact. And to put that much power through such a lightweight car could potentially be tricky. But one thing which has always impressed drivers of Paganis is how easy they are to use the performance of. They could very easily be just another hair-raising, white-knuckle supercar, but they're actually very forgiving. This kind of translates that to the track. It's not necessarily easy to drive the car fast on Gran Turismo, it does require some skill at least, but it's certainly not as difficult as you'd probably expect, given that it does have roughly the power of a real-life Veyron Supersport going through its rear wheels in the game. Now, with that much power, you'd probably at least hope that it would have some strong straight-line performance. It does. Very strong, in fact. It's one of the quickest cars of the series. The acceleration is very good, and the top speed is around 265 miles per hour under its own power. Even more if you're willing to sacrifice raising the front end, lowering the aero, and really wringing the best possible ratios out of those gears. What about handling, though? Because when you're paying 1.65 million credits, which is at the end of the day bordering on LMP territory, you want really a vehicle that can handle itself, especially considering the kind of opposition it's got to go up against. Thankfully, it doesn't disappoint. The FXX is not necessarily the easiest of cars to drive fast, and neither is the Furai, to be completely honest. This car isn't necessarily easy, but I would say that the Zonda R is actually slightly more forgiving than both of those vehicles. The Furai does have a ton of grip, but at the same time it's so lightweight at under 700 kilos that you can surprisingly easily spin up those rear wheels in much, much lower speed corners, say hairpins for instance. The FXX on the other hand is just naturally twitchy. A superb car, but twitchy nonetheless. The Zonda R is kind of a middle ground between the two. It has a very strong amount of grip, like the Furai, but at the same time it has the sheer straight line power and performance that you'd expect more from something like an FXX. And I think that that makes the Zonda better than both of those cars. It's not quite as quick as the FXX, it's not quite as good around corners as the Furai, but it has those two good points of both. And as an overall average of its abilities, that makes it a pretty strong car. The handling, I would say, is less taxing than both of them, because being as twitchy or as potentially slippery as both of the others are, over the course of, say, many laps or even a long single lap, you can start making mistakes. You have to completely focus 100% at all times to get those cars to ride on the line exactly where you want them, perfectly corner after corner. The Zonda R, although requiring skill of course, is a much more forgiving machine. The handling is smoother, not quite touring car level, but smoother than the FXX for sure, and the straight line speed just completely blows the Furai out of the water. There's no competition whatsoever between the two. So, as I said, in my opinion at least, it's a very happy medium between the two. Is 1.65 million a lot? Well, yeah, it is. But will you be disappointed? No, definitely not. Now, the main problem, I would say, with the Zonda R is that it falls into a no man's land as far as being a race car. It depends in public lobbies as to who will and won't allow you to use this car under different circumstances. But if you get someone that will allow you to use it in whatever form, it will serve you well. It's a fast car in a straight line, it has dependable handling, it has a weight to the steering, and you can certainly spin up the rear wheels of course, but it's a good, deeply impressive all-round car, which is kind of a shame that it's illegal for racing as well, because I would love to have seen this car feature in some kind of official series, even if it wasn't necessarily quite as fast as it is. But that's it overall for this particular review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.